Okay, I want to check one other thing though. Real quick, make sure it didn't alter the description on that one. Okay, good. Okay, sorry. And I'll do 99 in a minute. It was with this team. Or not that team, this team. Save. Oop. And get Scarab could take a while. We'll see. I'm going to mute Mike.
I add 80 milligrams of hydroquinone to the solution as a stabilizer, which will scavenge radicals and help prevent ethylvinyl ketone from getting destroyed. I then attach a fractionating column, a short path distillation apparatus. I put a strong vacuum and heat the mixture lightly, and with the help of a heat gun, start distilling out the ethylvinyl ketone. Since it's slightly volatile, I set an ice bath under the receiving flask. It did come over, though it still took quite some time and effort to get it to come out, despite it being relatively volatile. In the end, I collected enough ethylvinyl ketone to start the geosmin synthesis. It seems also some residual water has come through and was sitting on the bottom, but I will simply avoid taking this up when I'm going to be using it. The smell of ethylvinyl ketone is like a spicy, sharp vegetable, and it also stings the nose a little. Anyhow, now that I have ethyl-vinyl ketone, I can move on to the next step. So I have some 2-methyl cyclohexanone that I made in a previous video, but that was like a year ago, and in the meantime it has turned slightly yellow. I will not use it like this, so I'm going to redistill it. So I add all of the dirty 2-methyl cyclohexanone to a flask, distill it over through a fractionated column, under regular pressure. When it is done, all that is left in the flask is some yellow stuff. I remove the first fraction from the distillate, also the last. And I should now have 9.19 grams of pure 2-methyl cyclohexanone, which I will use right away. So I set up a heating mantle and a flask with a stir bar. So I will also need S-levyl alpha methyl benzene, which I bought a very long time ago, since I always wanted to do this project. And I stored it in the fridge this whole time, and I finally get to open it. If anyone is curious, many chemicals that are considered dangerous come in this type of package. But before I get to adding it, I first add in 50 ml of toluene as a solvent. And then add in all of the 2-methyl cyclohexanone that I redistilled. And then 10.5 ml of S-levyl alpha methyl benzene. Like earlier, I attached a Dean Stark apparatus, but this time I filled it with toluene. I also insulated it with some aluminum foil, because it had a hard time coming through. In the reaction, the methylbenzylamine reacts with the 2-methyl cyclohexanone to form the corresponding imine product, and water. Since the imine is also water sensitive, we again use the Dean Stark apparatus to remove it. I leave it to react for a day, and when I come back, we see some water has collected in the apparatus. In theory, a maximum of 1.48 ml of water can form during the reaction. There are also some droplets sticking at the top, so it seems that pretty much the same amount of water has formed, so the reaction should be finished. I then set the mixture up for short path vacuum distillation to remove all of the toluene. In the end, I am left with yellow. Now to this product, I directly add 8.1 ml of ethyl-vinyl ketone. Flush the flask with nitrogen. I then leave it to stir for a day at room temperature. This reaction is a type of Stork reaction, which is a Michael addition where the nucleophile is an enamine. The imine is in equilibrium with its enamine form. The enamine form can react with the ethyl-vinyl ketone, which is a great Michael acceptor to produce the final product. This happens in a stereoselective manner due to the presence of the bulky methylbenzylamine, and it will favor the R configuration. I come back a day later and then add 62.5 ml of methanol as a solvent, and then 37.5 ml of 10% acetic acid. The addition of water and acetic acid will hydrolyze the product, taking off the methylbenzylamine and returning the ketone to give the diketone product. I leave it to stir at room temperature for a few hours, and after that, it has become. And then move it to a heating bath. Set it up for short bath vacuum distillation to remove all of the methanol. When that is done, I dilute the mixture with 100 ml of water and move it all to a separatory. I extract it 3 times with diethyl ether, and then return the combined ether extracts to the separatory. I wash it once with 10% hydrochloric acid, which will force the methylbenzylamine into the water phase by protonating it. I then wash it once with water, wash out the acid, and then once with brine to get out most of the water. I then take the ether layer and pull out any remaining water by adding magnesium sulfate. I then filter the mixture through some cotton to remove the magnesium sulfate again, directly into a flask. I then attach a short bath distillation apparatus again and distill off all of it. When all of it is gone, the light yellow liquid is left behind, which should contain the diketone product. I then add 90 ml of methanol as a solvent and a solution of 0.46 grams of potassium hydroxide in methanol will contain some potassium methoxide. I attach a condenser, then heat it to reflux. Leave it for 2 hours. In the reaction, the base catalyzes the diketone to cyclicize into the first cyclic product. Usually the previous addition of the vinyl ketone, which is now followed by an aldyl condensation into the ring system, would be referred to as a type of Robinson annihilation. When I come back, the mixture has turned even. I remove the condenser, add 0.5 ml of glacial acetic acid to crystallize it. I attach a short bath distillation apparatus again and remove all of the methanol under reduced pressure. When all of the methanol is gone, all that is left is a f***ing dirty yellow liquid. I then add 90 ml of water to dissolve impurities and some diethyl ether to take up the product. I move it all to a separatory funnel and extract the water phase 3 times with ether. I combine all of the ether extracts, tried it with magnesium sulfate, and then filtered it again. I again remove all of the ether and then start distilling over the product. At first, some lower boiling liquid is coming over, which smells very similar to 2-methyl-cyclohexanone. So it's probably just residual 2-methyl-cyclohexanone. After a while, that stops distilling over, and I change the short bath for another smaller one. I then start distilling over the cyclic product with the help of a heat gun. I squeeze out every last drop that I can, and afterward, I am left with only 1.7 grams of the product as a clear oil. I'm not sure which step was so low yielding, but unfortunately, the yield turned out to be only 11.6%. Well, at least it's something. So let's just continue and move on to the next paper. I set up a flask with a stir bar and dissolve all of the cyclic product into 125 ml of PCM and transfer that to the flask. I then add 1.61 grams of sodium bicarbonate. Set the flask in an ice bath. I flush the flask with nitrogen and then slowly start adding in 2.46 grams of M-chloroperbenzoic acid while keeping it under nitrogen. When everything was added, I stoppered the flask and leave it to stir for 2 hours on ice, and then for 2 days at room temperature. This reaction is a typical Kuleshov oxidation, where an alkene double bond reacts with a peroxy acid to form the corresponding oxide. The sodium bicarbonate is added to counteract the acidity of the perbenzoic acid, which could lead to side products. After a while, the white precipitate forms, which is the insoluble sodium salt of M-chlorobenzoic acid. Now, I wash the reaction mixture 2 times, with 100 ml of a 1-to-1 mixture of a saturated sodium thiosulfate solution and a saturated sodium bicarbonate solution. I do it inside of the flask and decant the upper water layer. Since the solid has soaked up the DCM, it can't be done inside a separatory funnel. I wash it 1 time with some brine, and then add a bunch of sodium sulfate to hold on to any remaining water. I shake it strongly, and then filter it all through some cotton. After 100 years, that's all filtered through, and I distill off all of the DCM with short bath vacuum distillation. When only a bit of the DCM is left, I add 4 grams of sea lime, which will absorb the product, and then continue distilling off all of the DCM. When all of the DCM is gone, only the sea light that contains the product is left. Now to purify the product, I have to do column chromatography. So I set up a column and add in 100 grams of spherical silica gel that I mix with 20% diethyl ether in hexanes. I allow the silica to pack and then add a layer of sand on top. I run the solvent level into the sand and then add all of the sea light with the product on top. I add some sand to the flask to scrub loose any remaining sea light, and add that on top as well. Since there were some air bubbles, I tried to loosen them by tapping the column with a cork ring, but I went a little too hard. The top layer became uneven. Though for this separation it doesn't matter too much, since I'm only trying to remove the bottom half of the spots on the DLC. I run the column by applying pressure with a pump. After that, I collected fractions of varying sizes. On the TLCs, we see fractions 3 to 8 contain the upper half of the components, and the other fractions only the lower half. So I take fractions 3 to 8, combine them in a flask. I then distill off all of the solvent, and afterward I am left with a little bit of product that has a very sweet and floral smell. Now for the next reaction, I dissolve the product in 20 ml of dry THF, and then set it aside for a second. Set up another flask in a heating mantle with a nitrogen line. Then connect the condenser and add in 60 ml of dry THF. Add in 1 gram of lithium aluminum hydride. I heat the mixture to a reflux and attach a dropping funnel. Then to the dropping funnel, I add the product THF and dropwise add it to the flask. I then leave it for 2 hours. In the reaction, lithium aluminum hydride will transfer a hydride to the ketone and epoxide, causing both to be reduced to an alcohol and give the corresponding diol product. When that is finished, I add 30 ml of a saturated sodium sulfate solution to the now empty dropping funnel and add that gradually to the flask. This will destroy any remaining lithium aluminum hydride, as well as protonate the product. The sodium sulfate also helps the THF and water separate by salting out. I then add 5 ml of 10% hydrochloric acid, which will make sure that all the product has protonated, and also neutralize the solution by reacting with formed lithium hydroxide. I then move it all to a separatory funnel, extract it with ether, and wash it with brine. I take the combined ether extract and dry it with sodium sulfate. I then filter it off with some cotton, and do the exact same as in the previous step. I distill over part of the ether, and then add in 3 grams of sea lime. I run the column again in the same manner, but this time the separation is a lot easier. The product is the lower spot on the TLC. It took suspiciously long for it all to elute off the column, which is a thing when the solubility of the product is low in the eluent. But it wasn't a problem, as it was the last spot on the TLC, so nothing else could come through anyway. I combined all the fractions containing the product and distill off all of the solvent again. When only very little is left, white solid already precipitates out of solution. After a while, it is completely dry, and only the product is left as a white solid. Now to start the last step, I dissolve it in 160 ml of chloroform and add 3.2 ml of pyridine. I then add 8 grams of p-toluene sulfonylchloride and flush the flask with nitrogen. I stopper the flask and then leave it to react for 4 days at room temperature. In the reaction, the p-toluene sulfonylchloride will react with 1 alcohol group, form the corresponding tosylate and hydrochloric acid. Tosylate is a good leaving group and can therefore be used to remove the alcohol. The pyridine in the reaction mixture will take up the hydrochloric acid, form pyridine hydrochloride. When I come back, it is still a clear liquid, and I replace the stopper with a dropping funnel. I then add in a suspension of 0.8 grams of lithium aluminum hydride in THF. I add it slowly to the flask, and then replace the dropping funnel with a condenser. I reflux the mixture, and then allow it to react for 5 hours. In this reduction reaction, the lithium aluminum hydride will remove the tosylate group and replace it with a hydrogen. The remaining pyridine in the mixture is able to neutralize the p-toluene sulfonic acid that is formed. When that is done, I take it off heat and allow it to cool down to room temperature. We are now left with a disgusting yellow solution with some solid bits. I add 85 ml of diethyl ether to take up some of the product, and then add water to destroy remaining lithium aluminum hydride, and then 85 ml of 1% hydrochloric acid, which will protonate the product and react with any remaining pyridine. I then move it all to a separatory funnel and separate the layers. I return the organic layer and wash it with a 5% sodium bicarbonate solution to destroy remaining acid, and then once with some brine to take out the majority of the water. The organic layer becomes clear, and I separate the layers. I take the organic layer, add some sodium sulfate to dry it. I filter it through some cotton to remove the sodium sulfate, and then set the filter up for short path vacuum distillation. I removed all of the solvent, and a yellow liquid with some solid bits are left behind. I add some ether to redissolve it, but it isn't very soluble, so I add some DCM to get everything to dissolve. I then add 3 grams of sea light and distill off all of the solvent again. I then set up a column again, but this time I'm using diol functionalized silica gel with a small particle size. This will improve the separation of the compounds and allow me to get pure geosmin. I also use 60% diethyl ether in hexanes as the element, and run the column the same as before. When the column is finished, I combine all the fractions that should contain geosmin and set it up for short path vacuum distillation to remove all of the hexanes and ether. When that is done, I am left with a fluffy white solid. It should be geosmin. I put it all into a vial, but the weight was higher than the maximum possible, which means there is still some solid in there. I tried to dry it a little. It was very slow, and the geosmin starts to sublime. It's likely that the solvent is trapped inside of the solid, but it doesn't really matter too much, because smelling this compound pure is like putting wet soil inside of your nose, regardless of any bit of solvent. The smell is extremely earthy, and it really depends on the temperature and concentration what exactly it smells like. It definitely has some similarities to the smell of rain, but smelling it pure like this is not really the same experience. It just smells wet, damp, and a little musky. So to give it more a chance, I will have to dilute it. So I added about 50 ml of dipropylene glycol to the residue in the flask. It dissolved really slowly, so I left it to stir for a day. After it has all dissolved, it is time to smell it again. So this time the smell is a lot more pronounced. It is very, very earthy, and it's more like rain. It probably has some time to build up in the flask, and the concentration is way beyond what you would ever smell outside. It probably needs to be even more dilute, but that way I could make endless solutions. So maybe it would be better for you to experience it yourself. So if anyone wants to get a sample to smell it for themselves, I will send you some. The only thing you have to do is support me and $25 to your Patreon or via PayPal. And I will then send you a decent sized sample to smell for yourself, pretty much anywhere in the world. Then you can tell me what you think it smells like. Anyhow, I'm very happy that it worked out, and I finally got to do it. Thanks for watching. As always, a special thanks to all my patrons. See ya.
Shoot. Okay. Sorry about that. I did not mean to have it sing. Now, how long was it sing? Okay, well, let's see. Team setup. Gear. Oh. Excuse me. Ooh. it could be a better team, but decent enough. Okay.